He was an Olympic champion and an NBA star. But one day, an ordinary fall on the stairs revealed a terrifying truth. The disease was already destroying his body. Wayman Tisdale lost part of his leg and was forced to learn how to walk all over again. But instead of giving up, he picked up a bass guitar. Why was the disease only discovered after that fall? And what happened to Tisdale in the final months of his life? Watch through to the end. The finale of this story shows an NBA legend from a completely different side. If, like me, you enjoy looking back at the great NBA legends of past decades, and you're interested in their true stories and little-known facts that are rarely talked about, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps the channel grow and makes it possible to bring you more videos like this. Thank you. Now, let's continue. When a person chooses a second path after finishing their career, it is usually seen as a new chapter in life. But for Wayman Tisdale, things turned out differently. He managed to become a basketball star, an Olympic champion, an NBA player, and a successful musician. And then, an ordinary fall on the stairs suddenly revealed that inside his body, something had already been happening that he had no idea about. A few years after his career ended, he would be learning to walk again. He would lose part of his right leg. He would go through harsh treatment. And even after that, he would again take the stage with a bass guitar. But the most surprising part of this story did not happen when the disease began to take his strength away. It happened when Tisdale realized that he could still do what he wanted to live for. Today, we will break down the entire story of Wayman Tisdale, not just his path in the NBA and his unusual music career, but also the last 2 years of his life, when a man accustomed to winning on the court found himself facing an opponent that could not be beaten with speed, strength, or character. And if you remember the NBA of the 80s and 90s, this story will especially remind you just how quickly life can change, even for someone who seemed almost invincible. Wayman Tisdale was born on June 9, 1964, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He grew up in a pastor's family, and from childhood was closely connected to music and the church. But very quickly it became clear that he had another talent: basketball. Tisdale was huge for his age, but it was not just about height. At around 6'9", he possessed a soft touch, power around the basket, and surprising coordination. He could play with his back to the basket, attack from range, and remain very mobile for his size. At Booker T. Washington High School in Tulsa, he became a true local star. Then he went to the University of Oklahoma, and there turned into a national sensation. 3 times Tisdale was named an All-American. He was named the Big 8 Conference Player of the Year 3 times. Over his college career, he scored 2,661 points and grabbed 1,048 rebounds. Those records long remained symbols of his importance to Oklahoma's program. And then came what almost every young basketball player dreams of. Tisdale made the United States Olympic team in 1984. On that squad were future legends: Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullin, and Wayman Tisdale was one of the youngest players on the roster and helped the team win gold medals. After that, there was only one step left: the NBA. In the 1985 draft, Tisdale was selected second overall. Only Patrick Ewing went ahead of him. Thus began the professional career of a player who was just 20 years old. In his first season with the Indiana Pacers, Tisdale immediately showed that the second pick was no accident. He played 81 games and averaged nearly 15 points per game. For a rookie, that was a very serious result. He was not a player who built his career solely on flashy highlights. Tisdale was reliable, strong. You could throw it down to him in the post, give him the ball, and expect results. A few years later, he landed with the Sacramento Kings, and there he played one of the best stretches of his career. In the 1989-90 season, Tisdale averaged 22.3 points per game. Twice that season, he scored 40 points in a single game. Over 12 NBA seasons in total, he scored more than 12,500 points and grabbed over 5,000 rebounds. But if his story had ended with just basketball, it would still have been impressive. The problem is that basketball was never Tisdale's only love. As a child, he was interested in music. His father once gave him a toy guitar, and later Wayman began teaching himself to play bass guitar. Professional basketball pushed that passion to the side for years, but it did not destroy it. When Tisdale's career came to an end, music got a second chance. In 1995, he released his first jazz album, Power Forward. The title was almost perfect. Even after leaving the NBA, he continued to speak to the world in the language of basketball. Only now, instead of a ball, he had a bass guitar in his hands. And something unexpected happened. Tisdale turned out to be successful here, too. He released 8 albums. Some of them reached #1 on the jazz charts. He performed with well-known musicians, went on tour, and gradually transformed from a former NBA player into a full-fledged jazz performer. It seemed that life had given him a second chance. In 1997, at age 33, Tisdale officially retired from basketball. He could focus on music, spend time with his wife Regina and their 4 children, work, and enjoy the life he had built with his own hands. But in February 2007, everything changed. Tisdale was at home when he fell on the stairs and seriously injured his right leg. At first, it looked like an accident, but soon doctors discovered what no one had expected. The bone had been destroyed by a tumor. The diagnosis was osteosarcoma, a rare form of bone cancer. The disease was located near his right knee and was in fact the reason the bone could not withstand normal stress. For someone who had spent his entire life in sports, this was a particularly frightening revelation. Tisdale had recently been on stage, playing bass, traveling, and living an ordinary life. Now, he had to begin a fight for his own health. At first, he held out hope for a full recovery. Surgery was performed, then chemotherapy began. But the disease turned out to be far more serious than anyone wanted to believe. The first round of treatment did not produce the necessary results. A new phase of therapy followed. And for Tisdale, this was an incredibly difficult ordeal. He had been a large professional athlete. The drug dosages had to be calculated based on his size. The treatment was so harsh that he spent many hours at home, barely able to get out of bed. A man who once endured an entire NBA season could now spend hours just staring at the ceiling. But it was precisely then that one of the most important traits of his character emerged. Tisdale did not want to turn himself into someone defined solely by illness. He kept thinking about music. He kept talking to people. He kept smiling. And then, doctors made a decision that could not be taken lightly. In August 2008, Tisdale lost part of his right leg. For most people, such news would be an absolute turning point in life. For a former professional athlete, it seemed almost unthinkable. Not long ago, his body had been the primary tool of his profession. He had trained for decades, run, jumped, absorbed collisions under the basket. Now, he had to learn to stand and walk all over again. But what happened next surprised many. Tisdale adapted to his prosthesis fairly quickly. According to those who knew him, he did not let the new reality destroy his spirit. And most importantly, he picked up the bass guitar again. He even turned his struggle into music. In 2008, his album Rebound was released. The title took on a completely different meaning. Once, rebound had meant grabbing the ball after an opponent's miss. Now that word became a description of his entire life. He was getting back up after a blow, trying to return once more, doing what he did best: music. Tisdale did not hide that the disease had changed his attitude toward life. Before, success might have been measured by contracts, houses, cars, career achievements. Now, everything became much simpler. Family, the chance to be with loved ones, the chance to play, the chance simply to wake up in the morning and continue his day. And it was during this period that another important part of his legacy emerged. Together with his wife Regina, Tisdale began working to help people who needed prostheses but could not afford the necessary treatment or equipment. He had gone through that system himself and understood perfectly how difficult such a path could be. So his struggle gradually ceased to be only personal. He tried to use his own fame to help others. And all of this happened while his own condition remained extremely serious. In 2009, the disease continued to progress. But Tisdale was still working. He gave interviews. He talked with former NBA teammates. He continued to appear in public. And he kept playing music. In April 2009, he performed in Memphis. No one in the audience could know just how significant that concert would become. Tisdale walked on stage with his bass guitar and did what he had been doing throughout his second career. He played. For the audience, it was a concert. For him, it was another evening when he could do what he loved. A few weeks later, his condition deteriorated sharply. On May 15, 2009, Wayman Tisdale died at St. John Medical Center in Tulsa. He was only 44 years old. A man who had recently been an Olympic champion, an NBA player, and a successful musician lived far too short a life. But he left behind far more than statistics. In the NBA, his name is tied to 12 seasons of professional play, more than 12,500 points, and more than 5,000 rebounds. In college basketball, he remains one of the greatest players in Oklahoma history. In music, he was a performer who managed to build a second career almost from scratch. But those who knew Tisdale personally after he was gone spoke far less about numbers. They remembered his smile, his character, his treatment of others. Reggie Miller, who played with him in Indiana, spoke of Tisdale as a man with a huge heart. Sam Perkins, his teammate on both the Olympic team and in the NBA, remembered him as a true friend. That is why the story of Wayman Tisdale today looks different from the usual story of a former NBA player. He was not the most decorated basketball player of his generation. He never won an NBA championship. But he managed to do something that not everyone can. After one successful career, he built a second. And when illness tried to take even that away from him, he continued to make music. His body changed, his abilities changed, his plans changed. But he did not allow the disease to fully define who he was. This, perhaps, is the main reason why Wayman Tisdale remains a special figure to those who know his story. He was a big man even before he stepped onto a basketball court. And after basketball ended, that became even more apparent. Today, his name continues to live on in Oklahoma. His number 23 was retired by the University of Oklahoma. His music continues to be heard. And the work to help people with prostheses, which began after his illness, remains part of his family's legacy. But there is one detail that is easy to miss. When we look at photographs of Tisdale from his NBA days, we see a huge, powerful athlete, a man who seemed almost physically invincible. And then we look at the final years of his life and see a very different picture. A prosthesis, painful treatment, a stage, a bass guitar, and that same smile that nearly everyone who knew him remembered. And perhaps that is why his story today resonates more powerfully than many stories about sports stars. Because Wayman Tisdale could not change the circumstances, but he changed how he lived out the time he had left. He kept playing, he kept working, he kept helping others, and he kept being the person whom people remembered not because of his achievements, but because of how they felt when they were around him. If you remember the NBA of the 80s and 90s, you surely know dozens of other players whose fates turned out to be far more complicated than newspaper headlines and television broadcasts showed. On screen now, links to other stories from our channel will appear. Watch them if you want to find out what happened to NBA legends after their best years were over. Because sometimes, the most interesting part of a career begins exactly when basketball ends.